So if you're like me, you've watched all these videos on YouTube, you've looked at every image you possibly can find on Google, you've been on Pinterest, and you're ready to start your tiny house. Well, where do you start? You build a tiny, tiny house. So this tiny house is a scale model of what I want to build. So it's 1 to 12 scale. So for every inch, it equals real life 12 inches. For every eighth inch, it equals 1.5 inches. So with those numbers in mind, you can really get pretty specific on how wide things are going to be. So what this model does, it puts your idea that you have in your head into a 3D form, so you can actually see what things are going to look like inside of your tiny house, and if your ideas will actually work in real life. So this is the first tiny house I built. This one I had a 3-foot porch on it. I changed it and I made a full 24-foot trailer. I wanted to stay true to the tiny house fashion and make it as small as I possibly can, but also live comfortably. I made another one. I made it 22 feet by 7 inches, and that was just the floor. So I want to have a working toilet. I want to have a full-size standing shower. I would like a sink in my bathroom. I want a fairly large fridge with a microwave on top, a 4-burner stove, a 2x2 sink, 3 feet of counter space with a small 16-inch wide dishwasher underneath. And I have the window nook chair, also the washer and dryer. After looking at this, I realized that I could possibly make it shorter if I reconfigured the floor plan. So I made this one. This is a 20-footer. So to get started with your tiny house, you need to know your trailer length. So if you go on a website, you can find the inside dimensions. So inside the wheel well to the inside of the wheel well. If you're going to build it out past your wheel well, you can take that in consideration. It's important to remember that if you're going to be traveling on any U.S. roads, that you need to be under 8'6" at your widest point. So if you want to do some kind of overhang on your roof, you need to take that into consideration now while you're building your deck. Say you want 7 feet wide, 20 feet long, cut a piece of styrofoam, 7 by 20. What's going to determine the width of my bathroom is going to be the width of the smallest shower that I can get. Now 32 inches equals 2'8". So 2'6" is 2.5 plus another 1/8 inch. So 2 5/8 would be fairly close enough to what I need. On a fresh sheet, I'm going to mark 2 5/8, plus I'm going to draw another line 1/4 inch more at 2 7/8, and that'll be the thickness of my 3.5 inch wall. There's your shower. You can measure your toilet 2.5 feet off the wall. So this is a 2 inch by 2 inch tile, which is the dimensions of a stove that I found on the internet, and I can place that where I want it. A 3-foot piece of counter space. Now under that counter space is going to hold a 16-inch wide dishwasher, and then I want a 2-foot by 2-foot sink. Inside I had a 2-foot by 2-foot refrigerator, and then a total of 3 feet of counter space. On the other model I had it at 9.5 inches. I've now turned this down to 8.5 inches. Now if I take a piece of styrofoam and I cut it at 8.5 inches, which will bring me to the edge of my kitchen, I can figure out how big my loft is going to be. The bed is 6.5 feet by 5 feet, which I believe is a standard queen mattress. 1 foot 3 inches on the end of the bed, and it gives me about a foot around the bed. For my loft, the width is set in, but the length you can go as far out as you want. But I was also trying to configure with headroom. So with the loft, you can see it doesn't go all the way to where the shed dormer would start on the outside. It's actually back. So when you come up the stairs, you'll have way more headroom coming up right here. When you're inside your tiny house, you need to feel pretty comfortable when you're underneath your loft. So what I did was I stood and I measured up until I felt like I had enough headroom where I wouldn't be walking feeling like I was hitting my head, and I figured that I liked it at 6.5 feet. I'm 5'9", I think 6.5 feet to the bottom of my joists. So after I figured out the layout of the kitchen, I built actual scale models of the appliances, the height of the counter. Now this table is kind of a stolen idea from IKEA. It folds down. There'll be storage on the side here. I sat at my kitchen table. I measured from elbow to elbow, and I took that number into consideration. So I did pretty large nook in here. This ends up being 2.5 feet, which most couches are 2 feet where you put your butt on. Big memory foam mattress on there, a high efficiency washer with a 110 volt dryer, and then on this end I got a small 2-foot loft. I've incorporated a staircase into the tiny house. I've got 2 closet doors right here with a pull-out drawer up here, as well as 2 more down here, as well as a storage for shoes down below. So on the stair treads, I'll end up cutting this notch out right here, which will give me about 7 inches from this step to the top of this step. So the windows are pretty flexible. I mean, you can make them bigger or smaller. After I figured out my appliances and stuff like that, I drew some reference lines on here, which I centered on that open. Take your reference marks that you did for your windows, transfer them here, take your speed square that you got, square them up, mark it here, mark it there, find my counter height, go up about 4 inches, 2 feet, and I'm still underneath my loft. So I draw out all my windows on my panel, and then I cut everything. Now when I'm cutting, I don't want to cut freehand. I always want to use a guide. If it's going to be an under 7-inch cut, you can just use your speed square. If it's going to be over that, use your straight edge. And what you would do is make a pencil mark here, pencil mark there, line it up with both of those. So you can't make one clean cut. You got to score it once, which cuts the paper. Go again, cut a little bit of the foam, goes all the way through the foam, and then your final cut go all the way through, and you get a nice clean cut. If you rush your cut, you're going to get all jaggedy like this, which it doesn't really matter unless you're a neat freak, which if you live in a tiny house is a good thing. So this gives you a good reference to measure stuff. If you walk into your kitchen and you're not sure how big you need it to be to comfortably stand, I think here I have about 3 feet of space, pretty much a lot of space. You get a rough estimate of how many studs you need. You can figure out what you need for plywood. This is almost as like a blueprint for dummies. So that's my 20-footer. So if you would, show me a little love, hit the like, subscribe button, leave your questions and comments below. Thanks, guys. So to start building your tiny house, you're going to need this 1/4-inch styrofoam board, which you can pick up at Walmart. Is definitely the cheapest. I think this was $2 for a 20 by 30 inch sheet. You'll need about 4 of these to build one model. To cut the styrofoam, you can just use a utility knife. I picked up a straight edge ruler, metal. It was only 18 inches. I think it would be better if I would have got maybe a yardstick, so I could have cut my full length pieces. So instead of that, I just used a scrap piece of wood that was longer than 20 inches. I got a speed square, which I already owned, but they're about 15 bucks. To fasten everything together temporary, I bought these little pins. They're about 1.25 inches long. I found the ones with the largest head I could. And when you put these in, you want to put them in on a diagonal, not straight in. It'll hold better. I also bought a glue gun, which was about $2 or $3, and it will not melt the styrofoam. When you get your glue sticks, get the longest ones you can. I also got some masking tape, which I didn't use too much of. Use a pencil and a Sharpie to draw stuff. A regular tape measure just to walk around the house. Measure in between the toilet, measure the shower. I also use this app on my iPhone called Build Calc. If you're going to build a tiny house, you're going to need a framing calculator. In my next video, I'm going to be discussing Build Calc and how you can use it to figure out your rise, your run, which ultimately will figure out your diagonal, which will help figure out your wall height so that your total height ends up being under 13'6", including your trailer. Alright, since you made it all the way to the end, I really feel like you should hit the subscribe button. You obviously liked what you saw. My goal is to put out well-edited videos along this whole process of me building a tiny house. It's called Build. Where was I going with that? If you want to maintain you're a fucking dumb. Literally. You sound like a fucking idiot. Which happened to be... You are a fucking idiot sometimes. Nah. It was so good, but then the ending just fell apart.